Hey guys, welcome to our Sunday supplement. This is a chance for us to go a little bit deeper into the message that was shared on Sunday and go a little bit further than what a chance I had to share. And at the moment, we're looking at the searching for the kingdom of God, what it means to search for the kingdom of God. There's a lot of talk Jesus talks about, especially about the kingdom of God. And in the last message, you'd have heard me talk about what went wrong and how God had his original plan for humanity, and we kind of went our own way. We kind of did things our way. But then God has a new plan and God changes what he's going to do. And we see him choose the people of Israel. Now, all the way through then the Old Testament, we have this journey of the people of Israel and their relationship with God, their flaws, their failures, what they did right, what they did wrong. And have you ever wondered, why did God choose Israel? And why is Israel so significant, especially in ushering in his kingdom? What was special about the Israelites? Well, what actually happened was, if we go back in the Bible, God, after the guys kept messing up, and we have different stories, we have the flood, we have Noah, eventually we come to God chatting to a guy called Abraham, who was a nomadic guy who traveled around. And God calls Abraham. And God says, you know what, I'm going to bless you. I'm going to make you into a mighty nation. And he says, I'm going to use you in incredible ways. And I'm going to use you and your descendants to bless the world. And it was like God was going to build his kingdom in Israel as an example for the rest of the world, to show the rest of the world what he wanted. And he said to Abraham, he says, I'm going to give you this particular set of land where Israel has become. And he said, this is the place where I'm going to give you, where you're going to shine out like an example to the nations, and you're going to bless the world around you. Now, Abraham had two sons, Ishmael and Isaac. And Ishmael was born to his wife's servant. He was the older one. And Isaac was born to his wife, Sarah. And what happened was Abraham blessed Isaac, and Isaac carried this generational blessing down. And he was the one who was going to carry the family line, going to become this nation of Israel. Then what happened was Isaac had two kids, Esau and Jacob. Esau and Jacob, they both fought quite a lot. Esau was the oldest one, Jacob was the younger one. Jacob deceived his father, got the blessing, carried down the family generational line. The Bible doesn't spare any stories here, it tells the truth of what actually happened. And we see eventually Jacob in Genesis 32, verse 28, it says this. Jacob wrestles with God, and God turns around and says, your name will no longer be Jacob. From now on, you'll be called Israel, because you have fought with God and with men and have won. So then we see the country of Israel. So this is sort of Jacob's grandson, Abraham's grandson, even Jacob, who becomes Israel. And following down this blessing that God says, this is going to become a mighty nation that's going to bless the world. He's going to use to bring in his kingdom to show the world how he wants everything done. And Jacob has 12 sons. And those 12 sons, they end up in Egypt. What happened was they sold their youngest brother Joseph into slavery, as you do. Joseph then ends up in Egypt, becomes prime minister, cut a long story short, saves basically the whole Middle Eastern area. And because of that, his brothers come across and his whole family move to Egypt. And that's where we get the 12 tribes of Israel, the 12 sons of Jacob who becomes Israel, the 12 tribes of Israel. And there we get in Egypt. They grow, they do really well, they become really blessed, like God said they were going to be. And Pharaoh got really jealous. Later on, another Pharaoh down the line, he's saying, why are these Jews, these Israelites, why are they here? Why are they growing in number? They're going to threaten us. They're going to take over the country. So he put the Israelites into slavery. And he started doing horrendous things to them. He started treating them really, really badly. And God heard their cry. God heard these Israelites, who he had promised to turn into a great nation. He heard their cries from slavery. And he raised up Moses to come and to take the Israelites out of slavery. And to cut a long story short, Pharaoh got so extreme that he started killing the baby boys, Israelite baby boys. He didn't want them to grow. and be more powerful. And God says, Moses, I'm going to call you to sort it out. With my power, we're going to sort this out. We're going to do miracles to usher in my kingdom. We're going to do incredible things. So God calls Moses. Now, what happens for Moses is Moses goes to Pharaoh. He does the 10 plagues. If you don't know much about this, I encourage you to look at the story. And eventually, God frees the Israelites and takes them out of Egypt. After 40 years wandering into the desert, eventually they get into Israel. But just before they go into Israel, when they're wandering through the desert on the way to the promised land, on the way to the place they're going to be, God gives them these words, and it's Exodus 19, verse 5 to 6. It says, "Now if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be, there we go, start again there. You will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation." He's like God saying, I've called you for something special. I've called you to be my examples in the world. I've called you to show how I'm going to do it. And over the years, we see how God is still stuck with Israel. He's never sort of abandoned them. At times, he's left them to suffer the consequence of their actions. But he has constantly been with them. Even today, we still see him with them. But for these people who are coming out of slavery, these Israelites who are coming out of Egypt into a new country, God says to them, right, I'm going to give you a new set of rules. I'm going to show you how to live. Now, what we have to understand is when the Israelites came out of Egypt, they were going into a pagan country. They were going into a country that did all sorts of crazy things. They had a country that worshipped loads of different gods. It was a very pluralistic society. It was a land where sex was being distorted. It was a land where people offered their children up as sacrifices to idols and they killed children. It was a land where women were seen as possessions and something that could be bartered with and sold, and abused and raped. It was a land where women weren't respected. It was a land where it was survival of the fittest and the outsiders weren't welcome. That's where they were going into. Sound familiar? Anywhere else we might know? And God wanted a different way. God wanted the Israelites to live differently. God wanted a land and a kingdom of fairness. God wanted justice. God wanted a place where the poor were looked after, where the widows were not abandoned, where it was moral, where there was no corruption in government, where people worked together for the greater cause. Doesn't that sound great? For me, it sounds brilliant. Where foreigners were welcome, where the orphans had a home. And when we look at it, Exodus and Leviticus, Numbers and Deuteronomy, we see God setting out the template, setting out as a manifesto and his rules and laws for how he was going to make this happen. Israel is going to be his example. And as we move through the Old Testament, we see how God was with the people of Israel, how God kept guiding them, but how time and time again, like I've shared in my previous message earlier on, the people, they decided to do things their own way. They were seduced by the thought that they knew better than God, and they wanted to do things their own way and not God's way. And what we see is the consequences of what they did for generation after generation, and the fact that when they did stuff wrong, it impacted later on generations. And I want to encourage you, as we continue through the series, The Kingdom of God, read through the Old Testament, get into it. Look at Nicky Gumbel's Bible in a Year. It's really good. He explains it as he goes. But we see the theme of the kingdom of God flow through. This is just a brief introduction. I hope it makes sense. Any questions? There should be a PowerPoint appearing below. There should be a link below to try and access our PowerPoint. But I encourage you, send them in, ask us. We want to help you explore the kingdom of God and what it actually means. So encourage you to read through it a little bit more, the Bible, see that pattern of God's kingdom and what God did to the Israelites. But it was all part of this plan to usher in his kingdom, which we're going to explore next time when we discover Jesus and what Jesus did to start ushering in the kingdom of God again further.